Elevator Systems, Bowen Family Systems Theory in brief for a life of learning. Welcome to Elevator Systems, where we look at Bowen Family Systems Theory ideas and concepts in brief and understandable ways. Today, we are continuing our discussion of relationships by looking at kids with challenges. And each season, we like to get a guest from Living Systems. And today, we have Devana Weiss joining us. Welcome. Devana is a licensed counselor in private practice, a clinical supervisor, and a faculty member with Living Systems. She's been studying and practicing Bowen Family Systems Theory for almost 20 years, both professionally and in her personal life. She's married and a mother to 3 children, ages 11 to 15, one of whom has developmental disabilities. She has lived experience navigating the medical and school systems and enjoys assisting parents and caregivers who face similar challenges. Devana, what is your elevator pitch from real and professional experience, I bet, on how Bowen theory is helpful?
All right, it's just great to be here and share with you guys. My pitch is pretty, I think, simple. I just said a caregiver's worry for a child with challenges has a significant impact on that child and on the relationship with that child. This dynamic provides Olympic grade training opportunities to learn about oneself. And I said, further, my job is to notice my intensity, to respond with steadiness that's good enough for the situation, and to allow the child an emotional separateness to be who they are as I'm walking alongside them.
Excellent. Katie's turn.
Okay, so I don't have personal experience here. So I was drawing on, when I was thinking about this, my work mostly as a therapist, navigating, I was thinking about children in the mental health system. So I was focusing on the concept of differentiation of self, specifically being clear about one's thinking in the face of a challenge and in the context of triangles. My example I'm going to talk about is triangles. So I said many other people will be putting their thinking into how you raise your child. How do you take the time to get clear in your own thinking? And what is it like to hold on to that thinking in the face of others and your child? So my pitch is a question, which I've never done before. But that's what I'm putting out there today. Shorter. Dixie, what have you got?
Yeah. Well, the concept I thought of was the pattern of over and under functioning, which we have a whole episode about in season 1. And so pitch/question. Look at us go today. How do people assess, determine, or define what is a challenge? And how do people, same thing, assess, determine, and define what is appropriate help? How do people think through what is over under functioning for a child with challenges when there are real limitations that may be, long-term, lifelong? And especially when there can be many different opinions on the helpers and the resources to the child and the family. And I thought Bowen theory offers a useful framework to assess factual needs, demands, and the resources of a family in the short term and the long term. And I think, do I say this every other episode? It's the question of what is the help that helps?
Yeah.
And how does a family think that through? How do individuals think that through? All right, from Dr. Bowen, from the Murray Bowen Archives Project. This was a quote to a patient with schizophrenia in a letter in 1985. He says, "You are a gifted person with prodigious energy to put into something you believe in." And another quote was, "If you can battle for you instead of against something, maybe there is a way out." And then I went to the original sort of studies of Dr. Bowen and Catherine Rakow's book, which I will link to, talking about the first 3 families that Dr. Bowen worked with in 1954 and 55 with a mother and a daughter with schizophrenia. So just a couple of quotes. "The helplessness seen in all 3 mothers prompted the question, who has the problem? Sometimes the 3 daughters had higher functioning than the mothers, but they could not sustain it. Only one family member could be strong at a time. The next question was, where does one person end and another begin? And finally, one variable of differentiation is a clear, realistic estimate of self. So those are all the pitches through the decades. What do you all notice?
I was going to get interested and say that I don't know if people know this, but we don't talk about what we pitch before we meet. It's always the first time hearing, Dixie's thinking and, Devana's thinking. And so it's interesting to see, drawing from similar, not exactly the same, but similar areas of theory. I find that interesting. I appreciated, I heard from both of you thinking about the reciprocity, and working in parenting any person, and in working in relationship. I guess I don't even have to say it, parenting, thinking about the reciprocity that occurs. I think that was picked up in everybody's pitches, that the functioning of one is going to relate to the functioning of the other. Mm-hmm. There is that back and forth process. So I really appreciated hearing that kind of echo in each person's.
What did you notice, Devana?
Well, I was just picking up from that just, I think, a sensitivity in each can develop. And just how powerful that can be. And it can be like a chronic source of, over time, tension in the family, that the interplay of reality need versus what the parent thinks is, a need, but is maybe more anxiety based or coming from that sensitivity.
Yeah, I've often thought with clients how very adaptive that sensitivity is, and then when does it tip to less helpful or oversensitive, and how do people know the difference?
It made me think of, I'm sure we can link it in the show notes, but Jenny Brown's worry cycle. I think it's just it's such a useful visual to talk about that reciprocal process, about how an observation is made in a parent of their child, and it stirs something in the parent, and they respond to the child in a certain way that kind of gets this process kind of locked in. And again, like any of us are saying, it's not to say that there isn't something biologically occurring within the child. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that that's something that sometimes gets misconstrued somehow, that family systems theory is saying there isn't something happening. I think that that's not how I understand the theory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's really, I think, observing self. I put that in mind, that I really see that my job is to notice the intensity or my sensitivity to those perceived and real needs. And over time, in that observation, start to notice and maybe modulate how I respond. And I think common with all parenting, with all children, but what I would observe having like more normotypical children versus a child with a lot of challenge is that you're watching your child struggle quite often. And as a coach to that child often as well, that child doesn't like you because you're wanting that child to, 5 times in a row do this so that they, get it. And it's tolerating that inside yourself. Yeah. Noticing that, it's painful.
Yeah.
And it's a useful, like I said, lifelong exercise. And it's in all parenting, but it's particularly so when I think the system is looking at milestones and monitoring, and you don't experience that as much with a child with more, any level of challenge maybe, but more challenged kids.
Yeah, all that goes into kind of regulating self as a parent in really, really hard challenges. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and even beyond, what are the expectations from grandparents or teachers or doctors, and beyond.
I think that's, part of the growing process as well. And I'm just thinking about what helps as the caregiver, knowing your child enough as your child versus as your project, to be able to say, this is what I think my child needs. And of course, consulting with the child as they're able to cognitively understand, of course, and let the child lead in many cases. But I think the medical system, and in some cases, and even the school system, perpetuates some of the anxiety in that process.
Devana, that brings like my example when I was reflecting on this topic. When I started my work in mental health, I worked on these child mental health teams where I just, thinking back to my younger self, when I really wasn't using the resource of Bowen theory, it was many years ago. And I just have these memories of sitting at a school meeting. That's the one that came to my mind, where there's, a parent, the child was never often invited to the meeting. I mean, it's a good 25 years ago. Maybe that's changed. And like 6 other professionals. And I think what it takes for a parent to kind of hold on to their own thinking as you have 6 professionals in a room telling you what to do. And I was one of those professionals. And how I also was thinking about this topic as from a lens of a therapist. How does a therapist manage themselves as the helper? I would think about going back and doing those things a lot differently now than I did then, where I would often, I wrote on rush in to tell the parent what to do, or advocate for the parent without getting their or the child's thinking. Thinking I'm being helpful because I'm advocating in this way. So I just really wanted to put that in, because I know a lot of, counseling professionals listen to this, is how do you think about your space on this team, in this, in interaction with this system, this family system? How do you want to position yourself? How do you think about that? Where do you get caught? I know I got caught, and I just moved right into saying, the help I think is helpful right here is I'm just going to bulldoze my way in and try and, fix it. And in retrospect, I can think of many ways that wasn't helpful.
Yeah. And everyone has the best intentions, right? So as the parent on the other side of that table, you're hearing their great care for your child. Like, they really want your child to succeed. And especially early on, I think younger parents, it's really nerve-wracking until you start noticing the difference between the more anxious helpers or therapists or medical people, and the less anxious, who are just really open to, like, what's in our control here, what is not. Like, let's explore, like, what would work for this child, what would bring him more agency for himself. And so that's evolved over the years, and now it's easier to look back, but in the beginning it was a lot.
And I appreciate that acknowledgement of the usefulness of a helper who's managing themselves, who's managing their own anxiety in the context of this challenge. How a resource that you have available to you that can help you think, and not just also kind of push up your own anxiety as a parent, is really useful, I would imagine.
Maybe this is a good time to put in the reminder that anxiety in Bowen theory isn't just worry.
Yeah.
It's automatic responses to tension. And so for people to know that, like assertiveness or aggressive helping can be anxiety, even if it's maybe not the way we normally would think of anxiety, as being that timid, I don't know what to do response. I don't know if you guys would have other ways of of thinking about that. But
well, I think also, when your thinking gets shut down, like I think that's another way to, you're not worrying, but all of a sudden, I've sat with people who are like, I just can't think in the moment what to do. I think that's another presentation of that central nervous system, responding to stress and just saying, I'm gonna go offline here right now. This is what's gonna happen. This is gonna be my reactivity. I don't know if that was what you were asking, but that was the way. I was just thinking of the different ways that it's a useful, distinction of how anxiety is different in, looking through the lens of Bowen theory. And not always bad. I mean, right? Like, I think the other part that I try to be disciplined about is, anxiety can be useful. It's the way the system is responding to stress and tension, and parenting in any form involves responding to stress and tension. And how do you do that? And how do you want to present yourself? I think that's, I appreciate sometimes when my nervous system can come online to give me that boost of energy to manage myself in a challenging situation.
Yeah, Devana, what was your example?
I have a couple different ones, but something that came up in the last couple days I thought was a neat one. And it has to do with gardening and my sunflowers, because it's that time of year. I'm on the West Coast. I've just been noticing that, they're getting taller and taller and lots of leaves, but there's no buds. There's not one bud in like the 10 of them or whatever that are supposed to be like getting the beautiful dark, the flower coming out. And I was sitting at my kitchen table across the street, and my neighbors have beautiful, fully open, you can see everything. They're so lovely. And I got, and then yesterday I was talking to my neighbor behind me right here. She's got them growing as well. And hers aren't doing anything good either. And so I was just noticing when I come into my garden, and I just sort of appreciate that they're adding green. They're like, tall and beautiful. And then the days like, yesterday when I later went in there and just, like they're not doing anything. It's making me unhappy, making me a little, I don't know, just disappointed, I guess. Unmet expectation. And then thinking about, I can't make that flower bloom. I can only, add a little more fertilizer, water more, maybe consistently, work on the environment and how I respond. And I just thought it was a lovely, really simple example of what I can control, what's out of my control, recognizing the difference.
And does this thinking about the sunflower allow you to have so much, or maybe a bit more objectivity and neutrality than when you put that in the human, about observing your own functioning? That was such a great example.
Yeah, my brain always goes to, do you know what contributes to a day when you can be okay with the not blooming and days when it's more frustrating? And what are all of the other stressors or factors that contribute to the way we see things?
Or the triangle. I mean, that example is such a useful one to thinking about the triangle is like, is there something activated in one end of the trial that makes you move towards the sunflower, right? I think that I can name that happening quite a bit in my life, where I can have something fire up over here, but I'm moving towards a different point with my anxiety.
My example, I watched the movie CODA again, which I think it won Best Picture a few years ago now, about a family where the parents and the oldest son are deaf, and only the youngest daughter is a hearing person. And what did I write down here? It highlights the pressure that has been on the daughter to, be the ears of the family and be the communicator back and forth for the family, and how the pressure increases as she has her own desires and goals. that her family, she wants to sing, and her family, how can they be a part of that? And so I thought the movie highlighted really well just when there are, physical limitations, the impact on the entire family, and the challenges for all. The song, it didn't occur to me until like the movie was over and I started humming that song to myself, but the song that she keeps practicing in the movie is "You're All I Need to Get By in This World." And I thought, when we think about that in the context of our family and a kid with challenges, am I the only thing this kid needs to get by, or who else can be a part of that, and how can the kid be a part of that? A couple quotes. The brother says, "You can't stay here." Speaking of the parents, "They'll keep looking to you for everything." And then he also speaks of the community. "Let them figure out how to deal with deaf people. We're not helpless." I thought it was just an interesting movie to look at that, especially when the stress picks up in lots of different areas of their life. So
yeah, I like that highlight of like, how does the family define and respond to the challenges, but also the emphasis on the resources. How do they see and acknowledge and think about the resources that are available to them?
Yeah. And as they start to not just lean on that daughter as she goes her own ways, how do they make it work? And they show the challenge, the struggle in that, and the ways that they find a way. So
yeah,
I was going to say, it just really highlights how everyone has their role to play. And when one doesn't play one type of role, the other one will step in. I'm just thinking of the two of my kids, the one who has the big challenges. The other one is a very high performing kid. And it's just, to me, interesting to watch that defaulting.
the siblings. I mean, we're talking, I think we highlighted this around parenting thinking, but it is another element to think about what happens in the whole system, right? Always watching that whole system, and grandparents, and who stays connected to the family, who begins to distance. How do you think about that? And yeah, I appreciate that.
Other examples, or other?
I just put in this one other area in my example as I was thinking back about this clinically is, how does the parent, the sibling, the therapist, the helper respond with their best thinking versus, either their own anxiety or just responding to the anxiety of the other. I was thinking about that even in my own parenting, like the discipline of just, how do I get to a space where I'm not pouncing on, the reactivity, the anxiety, the tension in my child, and just get clear about what I think there. So I think that was one other thing that I wanted to put in here.
I'm curious, Devana, what have you noticed, in your own life or working with families, about maybe how the previous generations have approached these kind of situations?
Yeah, I have some older family members, especially on one side, that had more challenges with children. Of course, besides being a lot of fusion there, I think children were just taken under the wings of they seem to be taken under the wings of a few select people who just cared for them, and they were kind of kept more out of the wider systems in older times. I don't know how much agency there really was for them. I don't know enough facts, but I think if there's a good size family, they seem to like just sort of take it on. That's kind of where I've thought more about, is the child a project versus just another member of the family. He and she, or she has their own role to play. But I haven't thought a lot about that. It's a good question for my situation.
And even the societal approach, I really, really love the show Call the Midwife, which is started set in late 40s or early 1950s in England, and now it's up to the 70s. But even thinking about, the institutions that were created where kids would go and be separate from the family, and certainly these days there's so much integration, and what goes into the change and what's the impact for the family, and the systems in both situations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a colleague who had a son with Down syndrome and would talk about the reactivity that could exist in the community where, group homes and institutions were quite useful to a lot of families as a resource. And when there was a reactivity, I think it was in the 80s, where this is bad. We don't want to do this. We're shutting this all down. We're going to supports in the home. She talked about that, that worked well for some families, but other families, this was a real resource that they then didn't have access to. And so kind of also thinking about this societal process of how, reactivity in society about how we should handle various things. I mean, I could name a billion topics about this, will really impact the family. And what's it like for a family to navigate? How do we want to approach this? What do we need? What, like you said, Dixie, what help is helpful for us here?
The only other example I had that I sort of adds another layer to this that I thought was important was an example of my feeding dinner time experience. And what I've learned from that, there's years and years of struggle where my son would eat maybe 5 or 6 things. And so dinner time was always stressful. We would, through the years, try different techniques, lots of coaching on how to make this better, with no success really at all. And a lot of frustration from everyone at the table, not just parents. And I think a couple of points here, and one is that was really useful, was that my husband and I got to the place where, through lots of trial and error, that we made a decision that we had more defined roles, that he would manage this certain thing and I would manage something else. And one of the things was dinner. And it took probably a couple years, but he came up with a strategy. And speaking of triangles, I really worked hard, and with a lot of, stress in there, learned to stay out of it. And over that period of time, my husband and him were able to navigate through it. And he's now eating everything, any type of food you could think of, he will eat. And it's just to say that I think one of the things that worked was really getting down to his level and what was his pace and what would work for him versus what we all wanted to see happen at the table, like the way we did it and the way, all those expectations and the frustration coming out of our disappointment, and just coming along his pace. And I think is just was really important. So just a useful example.
I appreciated two specific things from that example. Really, the acknowledgement of pacing. I think sometimes, I'm a therapist, and I always say sometimes I can underestimate really the pace of change. And I could look at myself and even think about, it takes time to make and hold change. And then we probably could do a whole other episode on what goes into a co-parenting or marital relationship, and thinking about that lens through parenting. I appreciate you sharing that, thinking of what's it like to kind of hold yourself while one other person takes the lead.
Yeah, and I got thinking the short-term discomfort, you said it took a few years, right? And was there something that you and your husband were holding to that kept you sticking with things to see that change over the years?
For me, I think it was seeing how disruptive it was to the family table when we have very busy lives, and it was only a few nights a week we could all be at the table. And my daughters would come to me later and say, it's just horrible. Like, and so that propelled me, like, I'm not being responsible as a parent. What are some of my principles that I want to bring to this table? And how can we figure this out? And it was something quite small, actually, that my son could really chew on, like, so to speak. He could actually, sink into. And it took time. But I think it was my daughters and just wanting to, like, learn about their day, and it would just not happen. Or I would feel guilty having to make him a special meal because they would complain, why is he getting this? And so.
Right.
Yeah. The principles you hit on, I don't think we've talked about that yet. I really appreciate a parent thinking through their principles, because I think that's what helps. I mean, that's what helps me hold on to something. Why am I doing this hard thing? Can I get clear about what it is that's kind of helping me through that?
That was going to be my takeaway was, what's driving me in my parenting style, whether my child is got the challenges or more neurotypical. That's what when I sit with families, that's really what I think it comes right down to, is what do they want to see for themselves as in their families as the parent, and what can hold them steady enough. I like Jenny Brown says that, steady enough when times are really, really get tough. I think it is those underlying guiding principles.
Yeah, mine was Parent Out Project with Jenny Brown. And one of the recent podcast episodes, I don't have the name of it right now, but I will link to it. And it was about kids with like mental health challenges. And the woman speaks about these lighthouses, these sort of what are all of the lighthouse resources available to a family? How do you become a lighthouse kind of person? And the idea that came to me was like being a rescuer versus a resource, and what's different in that. So that was my idea. What about you, Katie?
I was thinking a little bit the same. I was thinking about the therapist. I thought you guys would talk a lot about the parents. So I was thinking about the therapist who sits with, a family. I was talking to a couple supervisees the other day about how do you get clear on what the goal, what is the family working towards? What are the individuals within the family working towards? And I think that's been echoed in some of the things you've been saying. Like what is the project for self? Even being aware of what is the project the parent is thinking about. It's so useful to a therapist to know if the parent's coming in to get you to change their child. I mean, I think that's an important thing for the therapist to know and be able to speak to what they're able and not able to do. And again, like you've all echoed, I think as a therapist, I just think about how can I be a resource? I like your language, Dixie, a resource versus a rescuer. When I reflected on this episode, I thought I was so functioning as my 23-year-old therapist self of being the rescuer. I just want to go in and fix this. And I can just, in retrospect, think about the many ways I got in the way of the resources of the family and the kid. And so I just think about the position that the therapist wants to place themselves to be a resource, a thought partner to, the family versus the person telling them how to be.
Right.
And that's tough because I think a lot of families want you to rescue.
Yeah. And I do think it doesn't mean that you can't share some ideas, but I think how do I, as the therapist, know, that question back of like, are you responding to the anxiety or to the best thinking? I think as a therapist, you also get to experience that is How do you know when you're providing a suggestion or an idea out of a thoughtful place versus that anxious, I need to give these people a thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. Well, we could obviously say much, much more. But thanks so much for being here today, Devana.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I hope that our listeners have found some useful things to think about and observe as you go out into your relationships. This podcast is produced by Living Systems, a nonprofit organization in Vancouver offering counseling and training programs in Bowen family systems theory across Canada.